There we go. We've got our robot voice, and we'll get started with a little bit of a screen share. All right. Can everyone see that okay? Both panelists and attendees? Give me a thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you very much. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of Tools for Thought Interchange, or TFT Interchange as the shorthand that I'm using for this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the agenda and the guidelines and a little about what we're doing at Fission. Ian is going to have a slightly longer presentation about Codex and standoff editing, and really a lot about how standoff editing is a more general label for the implementation that Blaine has put together with @JSON that we had last time. Brian is going to cover his tool Kanopi and how he's specifically using RDF and how RDF contributes to interchange. And Frode has a format called Visual Meta, as well as implementations on macOS and a couple of different apps that he's going to show and explain to us. Zoom, please do share those resources in chat. Please make sure you have panelists and attendees set so that everyone can see it. I wish I could set it for you, but unfortunately I can't. Go ahead and use the Q&A feature. If you toggle it, there's an answered example question in there right now. And we'll pause for that, and we'll actually get Jeff to read out the questions to the panelists when we get to that point. We'll have some time for general questions and discussion at the end. I figure this will go for about an hour and a half at least, depending on who wants to stick around. And this is all recorded, and we will share it both by email and in various spots to make sure that everyone can get access to the resources. And that's the panelists to make sure that they can send PDFs or links to their presentations as well. Without further ado, I'll segue into the part where I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're working on at Fission. So one of the things, if you haven't checked out, that I'm super excited about and that we're really building Fission around in a pretty major way is the interplanetary file system. And the kind of core innovation that we're super excited about and that we're using as a building block for lots of things is that files, data, resources, they don't have locations. They're not at example.com or some domain name that I forgot to renew, or another domain name that every human on the planet has to rent in order to keep stuff humanly accessible. Each piece of content has a unique content address that also is immutable. So that means that if you link to a particular file, you're linking to that particular bit of bits for sure, which has real implications for things like versioning and keeping links intact. Underneath, the protocol itself works a little bit like BitTorrent plus Git. So every directory and file is broken into smaller blocks, all with content IDs or hashes, content addresses, and anyone can stream blocks to the file requester. So this means at the protocol level, we do things like deduplication. This little picture is meant to say, you can get it from folks in your local coffee shop, or if you're connected over Wi-Fi but aren't connected to the wider internet, which is pretty great. We think of it as sort of one of the next big emerging commons networks. Just like anyone can put an HTTP server up, the IPFS network is even more of a commons network because you're jointly hosting resources. And as more people join, the performance and caching and everything else like that gets better. You can run it on your desktop, you can run it on a Raspberry Pi, or you can run it in the cloud as an operator, either personally or through various services. So what Fission has developed is what we call the web native file system, and it adds private encrypted files, identity, and a permission model, as well as metadata above and beyond the sort of bare IPFS. But all of it is actually hosted directly on IPFS. Peter asks, is this related to Gun? It is not. Gun's a really interesting peer-to-peer protocol. The stuff that we're building is kind of natively on IPFS, and in a browser, it actually uses a browser server called JS IPFS to actually put that directly in your browser. Finally, really, why is Fission interested in hosting things related to tools for thought? Well, we've had a number of people present in the past, Cosmic App, Dylan working on Cortex, and in general have spoken with lots of people who are building tools for thought applications. And a lot of them said to us, like, look, we care about user data portability. We care about users' data. If they're calling it a second brain, we want it to be encrypted and private to them, and we want it to be hyper portable. And those are really a bunch of the core principles that Fission has as well. So for the user, Fission apps keep your data secure and personally accessible. It's portable. You're not locked into Fission as a single provider. This is open source software that you can get everything turnkey from us, but you can also host it yourself, put it on your desktop, and it just works. So for developers, our software development kit includes user accounts, encryption, versioning, file and data sync, and plus basically full hosting and app publishing with subdomains and SSL and custom domains and all of that good stuff. So all of this is built on IPFS, truly permanent open links to data. So if this is interesting to you as an end user, as a customer, as a developer, open source or proprietor or otherwise who's interested in integrating with this, Jeff G would like to talk to you. And I'll actually get him very briefly to just say a few words around Project Pachyderm, Jeff.
Sure. So this is a idea that is not new to me, or it's actually something that we were thinking about and did some work on when I was at Mozilla in a program called Test Pilot, where we were trying to do experiments with browsing. And in particular, we had a bunch of user research that told us that people wanted to save web pages like bookmarking or Get Pocket or Evernote, and there's a bunch of there's a trail of projects or products or features that have really tried to help people save web content in some way that makes sense to them. We did a bunch of user research and found out some of the different ways that didn't work for people. And one of the most durable things that really stuck with us is this observation we made about people just screenshotting web pages and then emailing it to themselves, which is not involving crazy cloud services or anything like that, but is very durable and very understandable by most people that are using web browser. They know how screenshots work and they know how email works, and email is pretty durable. Cloud startups are not particularly durable. And so helping people save and especially recover and recall and organize their trail of web research, and especially in terms of tools for thought, could require some browser integration. And the great thing is that browsers have an extension API. And so you can create any number of things. And there are a large number of browser extensions like Get Pocket that Mozilla at one point purchased and hasn't done much with lately, that are all in the area of helping people save things and organize things. And I think that Fission is uniquely positioned to provide these kinds of things in a way that still has those that history, that trail, all that web content that you saved be yours and be stored in IPFS and be permanently there, as opposed to in a database somewhere, or maybe on a laptop that gets thrown into a volcano or whatever it is, to add some sort of durability to the trail of things that you've seen on the web behind you. So I wrote up some product requirements around this. I'm really excited about at a higher level, the possibilities around, so there's generalized web extensions layer that we have for browsers, that we can write the same web extension in Chrome and Firefox and Safari and have it all work generally the same way on desktop browsers, at least. And how we can use that as a place that Fission could, add some value to people and integrate with other tools for thought and have some sort of like integration layer and I think, you know, at the point where people are really interacting with web as they're browsing and they arrive at something that they find interesting, they want to save it for later, essentially. So that's the crazy idea. That was Monday afternoon. And
Yeah. So basically, anyone that's interested in working on clipping web resources to IPFS, we're going to working on clipping public resources. Thinking of making this available in things like @JSON so that many different tools could make use of it. So instead of every single tool for thought building their own web clipping extension, might we collaborate together on an open source web extension that solves some of these problems, right? So yeah. Interchange is the topic. So if that's interesting, please get in touch. And Jeff is basically looking for feedback and requirements gathering right now around these things. Amazing. Thank you, Jeff. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ian.
Hello. My name is Ian Neal. I'm a full-time web dev who's working on a side project called Codex OS. And I thought I might give you a bit of an intro to some of the ideas behind Codex in my slideshow before we kind of dive in. If anyone has any questions, just let me know at an appropriate point and we'll deal with them. Okay, so let's see if I can share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen, Boris?
You bet, looks good.
Okay. So Codex OS. The vision for Codex, kind of highest level, is to create a medium for relation. Now, what I mean by relation is not the normal computer science sense of this term. It's not foreign keys in a SQL database. It's not edges in a graph. It's what you could call the principle of relatedness, which we'll see in a moment is essentially metaphor and sense making. So I got this idea from a painter and sculptor called Vernon Blake, who was writing in the early 20th century, trying to explain, how he evaluated and understood art. So he was trained in the 19th century tradition. Before he became an artist, he was trained as a chemist, which is very relevant and interesting. And he also was sort of developing intellectually at the time of Einstein's theory of relativity. So Blake was, like many artists at the time, he was trying to think about what are the foundations of aesthetics? How do you evaluate, works from many different cultures, many different time periods? Was there anything that you could think of as being a common denominator across art? And I think we'll see how this is relevant to the problem of knowledge graphs. So Blake came up with this idea, which he called relativity, but later he just called it relation after Einstein's theory became well known. And essentially, Blake believed that the common denominator across art and really across science and cognition is this thing he called relation, which is defined in its simplest sense as a relation is an entity which is the result of the coordination of two or more elements. So he gave the example of water as being the coordination of hydrogen and oxygen. So it's not the sum of those two things. It's not those things just added together. Water or wateriness is something else. It's a thing which exists only when these two other things are related in some way. So you can think about, this idea of relation, this principle, is actually something very sort of germane to the structure of the universe. It's not necessarily quite an abstract thing. We can see it in chemistry. Then he extended this a bit further, and he asked the question, so when we see a painting like a painting by Monet, and we come away with a sense of what a Monet painting is, what is it that is going on in our head? And he hypothesized that what we remember of a Monet is not a single brushstroke or series of brushstrokes or blobs of colored paint, but something he called a color idea. And what he's sort of trying to get at is that what we're essentially, what a painting like that is a series of relations between things, a series of differences, a series of these relational entities. So when you see a blob of blue and a blob of red together, it creates something, it creates a perception in the mind, and this perception can be quite a simple thing, or it can go all the way up to quite powerful abstractions. So essentially, when we look at a painting like a Monet, there's what he would call a complex relation, a kind of a whole kind of tower of relationships. And in many ways, it struck me as being maybe similar to what is going on in deep learning. Although I'm not a deep learning expert or anything, but it just reminded me of what may be happening as a kind of abstract process in a deep learning model, that you're not looking at specific quantities of things, you're looking at something which transcends those things, a kind of abstraction. So this led to Blake's sort of definition ultimately of relationship and art. And he said, a line of drawing, a verse, a phrase of music, what essentially do they appear to be? They're simply a series of relations. So my contention is that this is actually quite an explosive idea for knowledge graphs, because what Blake is saying is that, in his day, they didn't have the idea of a relational database, or even a graph database, but they were talking about what does it mean for things to be related, whether it's philosophically or chemically or artistically. And we're looking at a kind of virtual entity, a thing which exists only when other things are in coordination with each other. So this kind of inspired me to think beyond, if you think of knowledge as being a whole series of relations between things, then we don't have to identify this specifically with edges in a graph or foreign keys or ontologies or things like that. I mean, those are useful approximations and structures, but we don't have to be limited to that. And that's just the limitations of computer science at this point in time. So as thinking beings, we can think about relation in the broader sense to be anything that you create that communicates meaning. So this sort of led to his other major principle, which is that, and here he's talking about sculpture, so this is why he uses the word plastic. A person accustomed to thinking in plastic thought, so someone sculpting, really carries out mental operations in terms of form, just as a poet does in terms of words. So I found this really quite provocative for text knowledge, because we live in a time when you look at Rome and a lot of these other tools, and they really seem to be kind of equating a one-to-one relationship between text and knowledge. Now, text is a symbolic form of knowledge, which is very powerful. But I think what Blake is pointing at here is that things that we could think about as being knowledge, which are created through mental operations, these mental operations don't have to be purely symbolic. They can be lines on a page. They can be two notes coming off, one note coming after another note. It's a mental operation which creates or communicates an experience. So this led me to conclude that for him, thought is more than words and categories. Thought is relation itself. So there's something that's going on in our mind. We're continually creating these and inferring these relations from nature, from a reflection, and we are putting things together in ways, one word after another, one color after another, and we are intending to communicate these relations to other people. So this kind of defines the mission of Codex, which is to build a system designed around relation in this broad sense. And I thought that this would be a necessary mission, because I think a lot of the tools that we use approach things from in a kind of fragmentary way. They kind of look at things from a textual relationship, whether it's text block to text block, whether it's the knowledge graph, whether it's ontological relationships, or the whole series of relationships that we communicate with, which are not kind of formalized or structured. And what I want to do is to build a system for bringing these things together. And for that, you need a space. So you need a physical space, beginning with a two-dimensional space, to grow knowledge in all of its modes. So text is a huge part of that, but we want to include images, video, anything that we can think of that we want to bring together. I want Codex to be able to handle. And in a kind of deeper level, to do that well, to have things being related, we need to support multiple interpretations. So, for example, if I take embedded markup, which we could think of as being HTML, Markdown, systems like that, they give an interpretation. The point of a notation system, like Markdown, for example, is that you're conveying an interpretation of something. You're putting something in italics, you're putting something in a quote block, you're communicating intent. Now, this is a beautiful, simple system for individuals, but the problem is it doesn't scale to communities. It doesn't scale to ambiguity, to second thoughts, to overlaying interpretations of things, because the very nature of embedding that markup in the text, there are limits set by the parser to what is a legal interpretation of that intent. So I characterize this as tyranny. So I say embedded markup is tyranny of interpretation. It's whoever put that notation in at that point in time, it's their interpretation and that's it. It doesn't easily support multiple interpretation, which means collaboration and so on. Now, to get at this system that I've been talking about, there are a number of obstacles. One is, if we think of a system, we need a two-dimensional space, we need multiple windows, we need sort of that expressiveness. But desktop OS design hasn't really evolved much since maybe the late 1990s. I mean, there are, excuse me, like aesthetic improvements, there's certainly functional improvements, but on the whole, the paradigm hasn't changed a great deal. And I think it's for various reasons. There's a lot of industrial inertia, there's a lot of risk associated with changing things. There's a lot of money that's sunk into these systems. Now, the one way out of this is the browser itself. The browser has in the meantime has become a very powerful sandboxed environment. It's become a very powerful environment for rendering graphics and text and video. So if you were so inclined, you could mimic a desktop UI within the browser itself with comparatively little effort. And then this desktop would run anywhere there was a browser capable of interpreting it, which these days is pretty standard. Pretty standard across Safari, Firefox, and Chrome. The other thing is, to create a system, you need shared resources. In this case, I'm using a graph database as a shared semantic resource. So just as a file system makes it possible for applications to operate on something, it contains the data, it gives the data some kind of structure. We need a kind of file system for thought, for relationships. And the way that I see the graph working in Codex is essentially a kind of semantic file system where it can host multiple apps, initially something like a note-taking application, document management system, but ultimately all of these things are generating semantic artifacts which can be shared across each other. And the ultimate goal of this is to create something like an operating system. I call this the desktop metaphor, or desktop OS metaphor, rather than a literal operating system like Linux. An operating system for knowledge workers, people for whom this kind of relationship is important. Now, I think, as I was kind of suggesting earlier, I think it's people in industry, people in academia in particular, they have a keen need for this. They have a lot of pain around unstructured text and media. So they feel the need for such an operating system. But we actually feel this need in our lives all the time. And the tools that we have try and address this in siloed, separate ways. But for the maximum effect, I think you need something that's a model that's between those things. So this desktop environment would, first of all, be multi-window, because knowledge is, connected knowledge is, it's not modal. If you are engaging in modal operations with one column on the screen at a time and having to context switch, you greatly reduce your ability to make relations between things and insights. We need to treat the desktop itself as a unit of work. Whatever screens you have on, any windows you have on, this arrangement represents a relationship, represents a kind of collective thought of relation. And we should also think about the dialogues that are possible between the foreground and the background. So, and a lot of this has been kind of just ignored in desktop graphical design. The background is a place to put an image and really forget about it. But we can think about, there being a kind of dialogue between the space in the back, which could be video, images, analytics, other things, and the space that you're focusing on right now. From a textual point of view, to get to this point of creating a knowledge graph that unlocks the potential of the text of the single user, multiple users, in my opinion, we need to liberate the user from the tyranny of embedded markup. Again, the problem is it's oriented towards a single user at a single point in time. It doesn't easily support overlapping opinions, judgments, interpretations. It, as Blaine so eloquently pointed out in his talk on at JSON, it doesn't support overlapping hierarchies of knowledge. It's a great quick system for capturing thoughts about something, but it becomes difficult to scale, in some ways impossible to scale. To do this, we have to separate the concerns, or in this case, the intent, whether your intent is style, whether it's typography, or whether it's semantics. So we need to keep those things out of the text stream so that we can entertain everything in that space. Now, what I found working on Codex was that working on this idea of external markup, which I've used the term standoff properties from academia. What I've kind of discovered, I didn't expect to at the time, is that really external markup is multi-user oriented, because if you're describing operations on text intent and you're keeping all of that outside of the text, you can put a whole bunch of metadata in that gives you some very useful information, like who is the person who made this? And imagine, for example, putting something in italics or creating a link in HTML and wanting to know who did that. When did they do that? Why did they do that? That kind of thing is very, very difficult to express in XML or HTML, and it's impossible to express in Markdown. And if you want true collaboration, if you want people working together on a shared domain, then you need to be able to capture them. It can't just be the last person in wins. You have to have have to capture all the different voices and perspectives. So the interesting thing is that it's not just in the sense multi-user, where I can put markup in, Boris can put markup in, and we can filter in and filter out these things. This also applies to yourself. I mean, you are a multi-user over time. So if you're working on a text in Codex 6 months ago, you have some thoughts about what something means, what you want it to mean. And then 6 months later, you realize, well, actually, I have further thoughts about this. I think this actually refers to two things, or I think it refers to something else. You can come back in at any time and add progressive layers of thought on top of that without destroying anything that's there previously. You don't have to rely on, it's not so much about versioning. We can all version text in GitHub or whatever. This is about keeping all these things here and seeing them in coordination. So it obviously, so this is good for yourself over time, your future self. It's good obviously for others, as I mentioned. The other interesting application is machine learning, because machine learning can be thought of as a user in its own right, whether it's supplying syntactical information about the grammar of the text, or whether it's supplying semantic information and analysis, sentiment, for, or even up to GPT-3, where it's doing some kind of translation or transformation. We can have not just one machine learning service, we could have all the machine learning services we want, analyzing your text and just dumping their insights into the system. And nothing that it does is going to erase what you have done. Now, in the last session, Blaine gave a fantastic overview on Standoff in a document format. So, and I really have nothing to add to that. Jason has a fantastic set of tools and a deceptively simple API, very powerful model for transforming this this external markup. But Codex kind of has, it sort of has that aspect to it. You can mark up individual documents, but the driving force behind all this for me was to network that standoff. So all of the standoff markup in Codex, each single piece of markup is represented as a node. So that means it's not, I mean, it's powerful, I think, to have standoff or external markup in a document, and just from a point of view of working in that document. But if you put it in the graph, you have the potential to connect that piece of markup with anything else in the system. So I call this approach the deep integration of text and graph. And I call it deep because it allows you to connect an entity in the system to any text range you want, any number of text ranges. It could be a paragraph long, it could be a word long, it could be inside a word, it could be a single character, it could be a Unicode, part of a Unicode fragment, it could be between characters. So it means that whatever your graph model is, you can map it to any resolution you want in the whole text space. The interesting thing about this approach, in my opinion, is that it's essentially transclusive. So rather than transcluding at the block level, where we're saying we've got a live link to something and we're going to pull that block in, because essentially standoff or external markup, you can treat every single piece of markup as a block. Because they overlap, there's no limit to the scale of the blocks that you want. I mean, you can have a block that's a whole document, you have a block that's a paragraph. You could bring a book in, a physical book in, and represent the pages and the columns and whatever you like. And the system is not going to choke on that. So essentially, I can use any piece of markup as a transclusion to any other connected entities.
Ian, one question that I had that I want to get some terminology to see if it's even correct here. So
okay.
Is it agreed that a standoff editor or standoff markup, I'm struggling with the wording. Is that commonly accepted, or is that something that you have used to label what you're doing? I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying is that @JSON is an example of a standoff document format. Is that the correct way of thinking about it?
I kind of inherited the term standoff properties from Desmond Schmidt, who's an academic in digital humanities in Queensland. And I think, I believe he picked it up from the literature in the humanities. There's a specific reason he used properties as opposed to markup, to mean you're describing properties of a piece of text, a range of text. And these properties stand off from the text. They are kept outside of the text. So that's kind of like the literal meaning. And there's a kind of academic distinction between properties like that and markup, because markup in the way that we normally use it implies a grammar, a schema. So you can even, for example, in XML, you can express the concept of standoff XML, standoff markup. It normally relates to adding metadata about an XML element. So not putting it into the XML element, but having it outside of the XML element. So there is a kind of an academic distinction between standoff markup and standoff properties. And I've kind of myself leaned towards the term external markup. So I think, like, we're not going to get away from the term markup. I think it's kind of easy to understand. It's got a lineage there with common mark and markdown. I kind of like the term external markup because we're doing things that are fundamentally like markup, but we're just keeping them external from the text. Does that answer your question?
Awesome, thank you. I just wanted to catch that before we went any further. I'm like, is there a definition there? Am I missing it? Please continue.
Yes, it can get a little bit academic, but I think that's why I take on it anyway. So this is a screenshot of what that kind of looks like from a graph point of view. So we have, a text in the middle, the green node here. We have it's radiating out a bunch of edges pointing to standoff properties. In this case, you can think of this as being markup. So you can think of these things as being, agent and concept and claim. These are regions of text which have been given some type information, much like the properties in Blaine's JSON. And we can also see that some of these things, particularly the agents here and claims, they actually point on to other things as well. So you can think of, the Codex standoff or external markup model is kind of like, you've got the text as the nucleus, you've got a cloud of kind of markup electrons swarming around it, and there are forces connecting those electrons to other things. So you can kind of even see that if we wanted to find our way from a particular, I've used the term agent here. This is the sort of historical term I had in the system to mean an entity. So we could find a reference to an entity, and we can see that what it's referring to. We can see that there's two different agents here referring to the same entity. And you can as well imagine that if I clicked in the system, I click this entity to add more things, it might show connections to other texts and so on. So what we have is a kind of a network connecting text to markup to the whole graph. So we can traverse the whole system and we can retrieve any particular range of text that we like, and we can retrieve them all at once. We can do some interesting things with that, particularly with what the knowledge graph community seems to call aliasing, or having multiple references. We could imagine, just to sort of visualize that here, we've got these two different agents, agent nodes pointing to the same thing. We can imagine that there's one spelling of the word here, maybe the full name, and then maybe a nickname or something, and they still understand what they're referencing. So we can, by this process of micro transclusion, we could pull back every possible reference that this entity has ever had in the system, which is effectively a kind of aliasing. So Codex is being used in a kind of earlier version of Codex is currently in use in academia on the Hildegraph project, which is the Hildegard von Bingen letters project, which is annotation of a whole bunch of manuscripts of Hildegard von Bingen, 13th century theologian. And so it's in use at the Johannes Gottlieb University in Mainz, Germany. So that's a 3-year project, and I'm on board as a consultant with that. The Office of the Historian at the US State Department has used it to annotate about 100 documents of diplomatic communications, to find references, multiple aliases, and document claim like events and things like that. And it's also being put forward as for the GeoCodex project at the University of Furman, North Carolina, by Chiara Palladino in the Classics department, and the Pico della Mirandola project in Sydney University. So it's in a state of being evaluated, basically. So that's kind of the high-level picture of the conceptual background of where Codex comes from, and I've got some contact information, which just for the slides, if you want to grab them later, if you want to get in touch, talk about anything. But what I'd like to do after there's any questions is to move on to maybe a bit of a practical demonstration.
Amazing. Thank you, Ian. Applause, applause. We've got 2 questions already in the Q&A right now.
Okay.
So Jeff, can I actually get you to read out the questions? So it's not just my voice on here?
Will do. So first question is from Norman. The question is, foreground and background dialogue. What are some of the UI UX challenges in facilitating that conversation? Does it get harder to tackle this if it transcends mediums? For example, text foreground to video background, image foreground to audio background.
Well, one way I can answer this question is by showing it. So let's pop into the Codex local version. So I'm just going to log in. So here we have a background, which just we can obviously change things. We can put video or whatever. We can make it. We can personalize it a bit. But to answer specifically, we might have a quick look at video. So I have a video here of sci-fi author Frank Herbert talking about his views on environmentalism. And let's suppose I want to take some notes from that video. My options at the moment, I've got 2-screen monitor set up. I could, open the video in a separate monitor. I could split screen things. Essentially, I'm kind of, splitting my attention across 2 different spaces. In Codex, I could maximize that video and cast it in a sense to the background layer. I can then create a new document, and I could start playing this video, and I could start typing straight away. So now I can stop that and start that and so on. This is actually just pulling from YouTube. It's a fairly basic implementation at this point, so I'm really just full screening that. If I want a bit more integration, like visually, I want this is taking up quite a bit of space here. I can switch this text window to glass mode. I call it, so yeah, we're kind of familiar with dark mode. Glass mode is simply having transparent blurred background in order to have foreground background kind of dialogue. So I can basically start this video going. I can take some notes along the way. And I can start to annotate that. Now, it might be a moment as well to look at some of the features just quickly of what that experience would look like. So there's a number of different ways that you can annotate, or I used to say annotate, tag something, link something in Codex. Folks in Rome would be familiar with square brackets, and you can use the mouse to do this. You can use command keys and so on in Codex. But one thing I found quite useful, inspired by Rome, is actually using that kind of markup. So now you can use that as you type, of course, like an autocomplete way. So so let's talk about Frank Herbert.
Cool.
And if I click something, it'll autocomplete that. Or I can, for example, hit Control-9 for bracket, and it will automatically wrap it for me and do a search for things. That's not finding that. Maybe I need Frank Herbert in the system. So we can add Frank Herbert in the system by hitting hit plus symbol. We're going to add.
Yeah.
So now we got Frank. Do a bit of overlapping annotation as well. We can.
Yeah.
We've got the thing here, so we can do Frank again. So now we got two things overlapping. We can kind of visualize. We can see what's going on if we use our little inspector.
That's super cool.
Yeah. That's just an example. So basically, I've tried to kind of optimize this experience a bit as you type. So you can, for example, I've got this concept of you've got the square bracket, like, which is a standard wiki link kind of link. But you can also do things like you've got the round brackets or the parentheses for aliasing. So, for example, if I wanted to say, let's talk about Frank, I can say, okay, I can shift between aliasing and the name of the entity, Frank Herbert. I can go, yep, let's select Frank. And I've now got a link from the word Frank to Frank Herbert. I don't have any embedded markup to worry about. I can overlap things. I can move things around if I like. I can if I want to adjust some things.
Yeah. The next thing I need is a video of Ian's fingers and his keyboard shortcuts and shift commands.
Yes, there's lots of them. And we can even sort of see as well, if we do a little export of our document here. So this would be, I think, rather familiar to Blaine. Anyone who's looked at JSON, it's very similar. We've got a text stream here and a whole bunch of properties about it. Probably the difference, as I said, is that there's all of this data is actually put into the graph as well, as each of these properties becomes a node and becomes possible to link to everything else. But as you can see, we've got our essentially our external markup here.
Yeah. It's a fascinating. My gut reaction is it's a fascinating combination of creating a web page that's linked and has these kinds of references, and the first time you write in a code editor that has autocomplete and tells you things about the language and the environment that you're writing code in. So that's a really great demo. I think we should be mindful of time and get through these questions, but thank you so much for showing us how it works. The visceral experience of seeing you use it was really great.
Okay. Do we have time for a little bit more, or do we need to wrap up?
Well, let's make sure we get through the questions. So Jeff, why don't you go through and read out some more of the questions?
Please.
Yeah. So John Knowles asks, do you see external markup applying to other medias besides text, audio, image, video, spreadsheet, as a way to separate content from style like HTML, CSS?
Yeah, I actually think it's really the default for those media.
Mm-hmm.
You think if you're we normally don't go into a video and directly put text comments into a video file. We normally we offset and say at minute 5, 16 seconds, we've got a comment. We do that with audio. We do that with almost everything else except text. And the reason we don't do that with text normally is because of the problem of updating those annotations as you type. Yeah. The humanities, the academia has been doing this for 20, 30 years with static text that don't change. But that wasn't really useful to me. I wanted something where I could change it. So I created this text editor to allow you to go and add and remove. And it tries to intelligently decide what happens if you delete a whole word, if you delete the edge of a word. It will shift everything around and synchronize the annotation so that things don't break, basically. So yes, I actually think it's a standard way. We're actually used to doing this with images and audio. We're not used to doing this with text, and I think we actually need to bring them all on the same page.
Great. Peter Vazilko, next question. Can we try it out ourselves? Which is a great segue into where do we get this thing? Okay.
So basically, Codex is in this kind of version. The desktop version is in what I call an alpha state. So there's a few. I'm still working out some of the kind of product feel of it. So I've kind of been working at a system level and adding more product features. So there are a couple of kind of alpha users of Codex who are very tolerant of lots of things breaking and so on. But the intention is I have a Patreon campaign to basically raise some money towards releasing a beta version, which will be, in many respects, the product anyway, kind of like Gmail beta. It will be, be more secure. It'll be more, it'll have more redundancy, all that kind of thing. As I'm working on this part-time, essentially I'm trying to either find more time to work on it, to fund that, or to have funding to contract people to help me do that, which is not cheap, sadly. So the intention is to have the beta out in 2021. Firstly, to guarantee to the Patreon supporters, the VIP Patreon supporters, but I'm also, there is space for alpha testers as well. Yes. Hope that answers your question.
And then we'll get that link out to the Patreon if people are interested in contributing there. We've also used Open Collective, I know, at Fission, and those kinds of sort of crowdsourced funding models are really great ways to get stuff built like this. Next question from AB is, hey, Ian, the relations between nodes are standoff 2. They exist as nodes 2. How is that possible?
Well, if that means like how is the markup a node? I think is that.
I think maybe are the edges, are the links standoff as well?
Well, I kind of think of the term standoff as being applied, I guess, to a media like text or pictures, but you could have standoff nodes about standoff nodes. For example, if that kind of addresses it. For example, you could say, you could write a comment about one particular standoff node. You could group standoff nodes together, which I actually do for text blocks for performance reasons. You can do the same for syntax as well, like verb clauses, noun clauses. So I can show as well, if we have the time later, to how syntax works with that and so on. But yes, you can apply the same principles to the standoff nodes also.
Cool. I've just got one more question that's in the Q&A here from Michael Gartner. Codex, would this format allow for easier interoperability from, say, browser to mobile to VR AR? I.e. drop in some documents into the graph via the browser, drop in some tasks via mobile, view an AR VO like a mind palace. I love that phrase.
Yes,
what do you think?
Like that would be kind of like the ultimate version of it. I don't have a lot of I only have experience with VR, so I'm working in the space that I have experience in. But the other thing, to be honest, I think that there's a lot of fundamentals to get right. I think it would be easy to say, let's sort of take these things, put them in a 3D space, now we have a mind palace. But I actually think that the problems are more fundamental, more symbolic problems about creating meaning and relation. So I think I have intention to start playing with 3D spaces, probably with 3JS in the browser first. But I think there's actually a lot to explore in the 2D, in the foreground, background, to kind of get that working first, to maximize that, and to start sort of dipping my toes into the 3D space where it makes sense to do that.
Great. Last question. Any plan to eventually go open source, from Marc-Antoine Perron?
I do have a component of it for the academic purposes. I've got the core editor is open source, a version of that editor from about 6 months ago. I would ultimately like that, but there is as well the financial reality. Being a single income family, I can't justify working on it open source myself in perpetuity. For the things that I want to do with it, it's going to need more team members and
license is separate from business model. We're going to keep talking about this.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I want to kind of try and answer that question fairly, because I think there's, to my mind, I think open source is an overlapping thing. It means different things to different people. There's having access to source code, which for some people is great, other people is meaningless. There's the ability to set up the system on your own computer. That requires documentation. There's the ability to reuse something that requires licensing. And then there's the whole collaborative development model. And now that could be really powerful and useful, but that's assuming that the problems are only technical problems. A lot of what I'm trying to do is really feel my way around interfaces and creating a medium.
Yeah.
And in some ways I find that closer in my own limited experience to writing or painting. And it would be kind of a weird thing to say, to say to a painter, can you open source that painting? I mean, there's a value in having a vision and trying to see it through. And at this point in time, I'm trying to kind of realize that vision. And at the moment, I can best do that myself or in more direct collaboration with people.
His answer is, Ian is the benevolent dictator for life of Codex OS. Thank you for asking. Whether or not the source is available is a separate question. Ian, we are keeping Frode up, so I don't think we're gonna have a bunch more time for demos. Let's make sure we link a bunch of some of your videos and things like that that you have shared.
On pure Coca-Cola, so don't worry about me.
Yeah, one more round of applause, please, for Ian and Codex. That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Frode, I'm going to bring you up on stage.
Oh, okay. Right. That was a bit earlier than expected, but sure. May I have screen privileges, please?
You should have them.
Oh, I just, Ian, I think you need to take it and then I come back up, or yeah, Ian, you have to stop sharing first.
Here, I think I can toggle this.
Okay.
There we go. And there we go. Give that a shot.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't find the control.
No worries.
Yeah, especially when it's got the Zoom things on top of it. So yes, let's dive straight into this. First of all, as I just blogged, it is kind of amazing to be in this group because there's been so many communities, and Marc-Antoine knows exactly what I'm talking about, and Jack Park, of things going here and there. And this is people making stuff, and it's all about making stuff, tools for thought, and it's amazing. And as I showed earlier, for me, Tools for Thought goes back to 1985, at least the book, which Howard wrote. And of course, I expect most of you know Howard. He talked about tools of thought in a more general sense. And it was because of that book that I came across Doug, who became my mentor, and also Ted. So I just wanted to do a little shout out to Howard for that. So I'm just going to try to make you guys a bit smaller on my screen. There are different kinds of augmentations, different kinds of tools for thoughts. There are second brains and graphs and hypertext systems, but there are also documents. I'm really interested in documents, which is why I've developed Author and Reader to macOS pieces of software. That's because I passionately find source and product really important, not just process. And it seems like you guys are focusing on process, which is absolutely fantastic. And process is important, but for some reason, I'm kind of stuck on these other edges. So the point of what I'm trying to do is increase the power of the written word by making documents more powerfully interactive to support faster and deeper reading, as well as more thought out writing, by adding a few words at the end of a book or document. This approach builds more richly interactive environments where the elements in the environments are more aware of themselves, what their characteristics are, and their context. The key is to let documents know more about who they are, how to cite them, what they contain, and how they are structured. So this is a book. In one of the first pages of a book, we generally have an edition notice, copyright page, got many names, that gives us metadata about what the book is. And here's the metadata for a PDF document. It's a joke because there's absolutely nothing there, which I think is really, really weird. Of course, it can be there, but it isn't. So all I've done, my big invention to the world is this. I've taken essentially that front stuff and put it at the back of a document. That's basically it. It's really important to emphasize this is an appendix at the same level of text as the rest of the document. And no, before someone in the chat says, oh, great, another standard. It's not a new standard. It is basically BibTeX with a bit of JSON. Tomorrow we are having, we have 2 meetings a week called open office hours related to the future of text. Tomorrow, some of us are coming together to define some of the extensions, but basically it's just BibTeX. And it's an approach. It's not a total standard. It's divided into simple things. There's an introduction that says, hello, this is visual meta, version whatever, and this is the software that generated it. Then there's the descriptive metadata or citing metadata that is actually 100% BibTeX. For those of you who are not in academia, this is what BibTeX looks like. It's really crucial that it is human readable as well as machine readable. And then there's structural stuff that basically, in the normal basic sense, just says these are the headings in the document. And it can also have who authored the part of the document. For instance, for the Future of Text book, there's a huge amount of wonderful contributors. They are acknowledged in this way. Later, we'll have a look at why that's a good idea. So the little bit there is the metadata, and below that is what I like to call retained structural data, because I find it really bizarre and awful and weird and horrible that you can work in even something as mainstream as Microsoft Word, have a lot of richness of interactions while you're authoring, and then you export to a flat format. I find that very strange. So Visual Meta aims to take a lot of what you already have, but put it in a format that can be richly used later. When you actually export Visual Meta, there's a huge paragraph on top saying what it is so that other people can actually use what this is. They don't have to go to some website or to talk to us. We're also looking into how to encode semantics and paratext, such as adding references, glossary, and endnotes to Visual Meta. Some of it we've done already. And this is an example of how a glossary in full is inserted. And it's extensible. If someone thinks that Dublin Core is the way to go, fine, put Dublin Core in there, just say what it is. So we can even go further. On this PDF, after the appendix, there can be another appendix with annotations and amendments. If a document is being passed around, you can put on another page in the document who's in it, what's been approved. Your annotations can be there so they can be easily extracted and so on. And to close this, the benefits. First, you get advanced interactions, such as what I've built into the author-reader relationship. Author can export documents to PDF that has visual meta, and reader can read them. That's kind of the point. So you can fold a document into an outline, so you always have headings. Being able to instantly jump around the document is a very basic thing, but it's also quite useful. Here's one that a friend, Mark Anderson, begged me to do, and thank God he did. When you're reading a document exported in this way and you come across a citation, the citation will have a number next to it. There are many different formattings. This is one. You click on that and little pop-up will come up and show you the full reference. This whole thing of clicking to go at the end of the document to find out what the citation is a bit crazy. And then this is really, really exciting. This is entirely new. This is in the version of Author that's been out for less than 6 hours. We tried to rush for today. So here's Author, here's text. It's all very nice, very simple and gray. Click at the bottom of the screen or do Command M to go to the map. And this is respectfully almost the opposite of what many in the community are doing. This is the kind of concept mapping we're doing. There's hardly anything here. If you click on SRI, there's nothing. But if you click on Augment NLS, 2 lines appear. The one at the bottom appears because there is a sentence in the definition of Augment/NLS that says, system developed by Doug Engelbart at SRI. If I click on this node and do Command D for definition, what I have written in here is what generates the lines. And for all the clever people here, I'd like to emphasize that there's nothing really clever going on. This is really, really simple stuff. So I wondered what to call this kind of a view. I settled on concept mapping because it is a concept map. It just doesn't show the arrow, so to speak, or the relationship types unless you point to something. And the reason we're doing it this way, if you look, when I click on Doug, wrote Augmenting Human Intellect, and here, paper by Doug Engelbart. One problem I have with graphs is that very often there's a relationship from A to B, but not from B to A. And so if you have a line, even if it's got an arrow, it doesn't really look like that. It looks like they're connected, which they sometimes are. The final thing to talk about this is designed for a student at a university or private student learning something. So the point is that as they learn, they define. So they come across Ted Nelson, coined the term hypertext, wrote computer lab, whatever. You write your note, you define it for yourself here. And then go back to the presentation here. What you can now do is export that document as a PDF with these definitions intact. They will be exported as a glossary. Glossary is not a very sexy term, so we don't really tell people that it's a glossary. We just do Command D for definition. So we export it, and in Reader and in Author, if you do Command F on selected text, it shows you only the lines with that text. So Command F is one of those things we all know. Here it just works a bit different. So this is the thing that I'm really excited about. If you select text that happens to have a definition, meaning it happens to have a glossary entry, you get the find, plus at the top, you get the definition. So that means that you're reading a big document, you want to find the first instance of a word. You do this and, oh, how nice, there's a glossary definition at the top. But the really cool thing is that you may notice the definition, but it's quite small, so I'll read it. It says, Doug Engelbart, that was the text I selected, worked at SRI, developed NLS, later named Augment. SRI, NLS, and Augment are bold. That means that they are also glossary terms. So you can click on them and their definitions will load. So it means that you can, in a very simple, low interaction style, jump around the knowledge connections that author made while working. So augmented citing is the second kind of big feature, and it's very simple. You copy text, you paste it in a word processor, and you paste it as a full citation. That is because in Reader, when you copy text, you also copy the entire visual meta, which includes the BibTeX. So when you paste into any aware word processor, it says, this is not just text, it's a citation, and I have all the citation information I need. If you do it from author, it'll be included automatically, of course. But if you take any document that has a DOI and open it in Reader, Reader will say, I can resolve this, should I do that? And it resolves it into a visual meta at the end. There are other ways to do it as well. This approach also enables computational text, like Brett Victor has shown, done amazing things. This can do that because the visual meta at the end will say, the text in the document has this meaning. Here's a basic, super simple example. And it's because it's a completely open system, the interface for how to do this later on when you're reading is down to that developer. It also features server surfacing, meaning that a server can quickly read these PDFs because you scan them from the back. You don't start at the front. So they can even encode what the graphs, simple table, XY axis, or whatever it might be in there, so that that data can be directly interacted with. And the final two benefits, which I think is really, really important, because what Ian is doing is really amazing. It's a space for thought. I am really, really rooted in, at some point, I think the knowledge product has to be in a kind of a book. I'm just representing text in the basic way. So if you produce a document with visual meta, it will open in any PDF reader because it's just text. I need to emphasize that because it's a really stupid system in this sense. There's no AI, there's no smarts. It's just text at the end. In fact, let me just show you the visual meta for this. This is the visual meta for the future of text. It's absolutely tiny. There's no reason for it to be big. So it's just 2 pages in this massive book. And the other half of that coin is that it's so robust that it can be printed, scanned, OCR'd, and no metadata is lost. So the reason I chose PDF, because I hated PDF, is quite simply the printability, and also I expect PDFs to be around in 1,000 years because so many important documents are in PDF. So there is no worry about that. That's the whole point. So in closing, the goal is to increase the power of the written word by adding a few words at the end of the document to describe what the document is in a human and computer readable manner. It is a simple proposal which can provide the means of powerful interactions in a robust way. And as always, here is Edgar. He is my son. He's now just turned 4. I don't want him to grow up with PDFs that are basically JPEGs. He needs richer environments, and I hope that he can work in a Codex editor, copy using visual meta into a completely different world, paste something live, but we still have this robust underpinning. Thank you super much.
Amazing, amazing.
Great.
Thank you, thank you. I hope there's 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, there are.
I think we've mainly got some comments from jury, not questions. I want to take panelist privilege and actually ask the question. You are seeing PDF as the base interchange format, where you're using the vessel of PDF to put this extra information in. Is that how you think about it?
Yes, because as I saw a brief comment here, in Doug's world, the mother of all demos and all that, remember, he had a journal. He had a very basic but very powerful versioning system. You could commit something to the journal, but you can never change it. If you wanted a new version, it's version 2 and so on. I'm a PhD student in my old age. I just turned 53 this week, so happy birthday to me. But one of the first things about starting my PhD is All documents rot. You know, the web, as you all agree, link rot is a horrible thing, but also just basic documents go out of fashion. Do you know the first time someone typed digital text in a computer? Nobody knows. It's actually lost to time. I've spent a lot of time trying to find that out. I know the building, and I think I know the people, but there's so much lost. A lot of Ted Nelson's early stuff was just on paper. Mark Anderson has done all kinds of scanning in OCR, and it's all horrible. So even though we need really rich universes, like Mark Antoine is also working on, I think at some point, at the end of the day, we have to publish. As I said, my background is as an artist, Chelsea School of Art. I remember my art teacher as a teenager say to me, when I was adding more and more to the frame, she said, at some point you got to stop. You got to frame it. There has to be a product. And, you know, with Google Docs and a lot of continuous spaces, that seems to be lacking. So I really think it's important that, okay, I publish this thing to the world as richly as I can. And what I'm talking about here is a stopgap. I'm aware that it is actually quite pathetic, but considering our other opportunities now, it's at least a step in the right direction.
I don't think it's pathetic at all. I think that phrase of PDF in 1,000 years, that's just amazing imagery. Thank you. Thank you. Happy birthday. We're going to try and do this for your son, all of us.
So on that was very kind words, but if you are interested in import-export with Visual Meta, please remember it's not just at the back of the document, it's also on the clipboard. So that's why something like this, you know, clipboards can handle multiple payloads. If we can just put things in that are self-describing, because that's a really key thing about Visual Meta, anybody should be able to put anything they want in Visual Meta for their own use, provided they say what it is. A brief example would be geographic locations. They can put the numbers in, but they have to write what those numbers mean. What coordinate system are you using? So, you know, it is basic human openness. Thank you.
I think there's some really interesting opportunities, and I think that's what this group wants to explore, right? So when Jeremy showed his EPUB to TiddlyWiki, you know, I've said EPUB to @JSON with then a world of other conversions in there, and I see the same thing. Lots of tools would love PDF to @JSON in to get to other things, and if that PDF converter automatically understands Visual Meta, right, we get more stuff out of it. Jeff, can you take us through some of the...
So I was just going to say, I put a link to the community where we're developing the standards and other things around the future of text. So
amazing.
Yeah, great. And sure, we've got a couple questions here from Thomas. Do I understand it right? Visual Meta appends a page to the PDF with standoff markup, etc. I think you were sort of addressing that a minute ago, but maybe just clarify.
Yeah, it's really, really important. That's all it is. You can imagine it as you have a book and you take a note piece of a yellow sticky and you just plop it at the back. And the way it's parsed is the very last tag is @Visual Meta end. So when the reader finds that, it knows it's there and then it goes backwards to try to read it. So yeah, it's just that.
And then the next question is from Blaine. Could we use content addressing to point at PDFs, e.g. IPFS, and put Visual Meta with a pointer to the content address like Lightroom's non-destructive edits?
That sounds amazingly interesting. Yes, I mean, yes. I don't know how, but to do it in the right way for the user and for the system, that's the kind of thing we need to do. You know, yeah, great.
Okay. Marc Antoine disagrees with you. He says, not really, I think, but the Visual Meta in the PDF would change the IPFS hash of the PDF. I'm not sure.
There's an order of operations here, but this is the exact kind of stuff. So the main thing to understand is that IPFS is a completely flat and a mutable namespace, which is amazing. We can point to anything anywhere. So if people ask how many hashes are there, roughly as many as there are atoms in the universe. That looks like a great challenge of literally just getting one of those things working. Yeah, amazing.
It is an important challenge. And here's the absurd thing coming from me as a PhD student. When I come across a citation to another document, it doesn't link to the document. It links to a gosh darn download site. It's insane.
Yes.
And of course, it doesn't link inside because page numbers are dirty somehow, right? So we should be able to, if we have it on our desktop, on our hard drive, or in the cloud, or on IPFS, or if in any known location, it should open the darn thing. And the reason that is important is that if you have a citation and it's not instantly checkable, people won't check it.
Amazing. Thank you, Frode. One more round of applause, emoji applause in the chat. And thank you also for joining us so late. I'm glad that Poke is keeping you up.
I will crash soon, but first I will just mute and hide my video. But it's wonderful to be in the community. I was also here last week, but family things meant that I was basically lurking. So thank you, and I will withdraw a little bit and listen.
Amazing. Thank you. Brian, come on down.
All right. Everyone's still awake? I'm trying.
Woot, woot.
Oop. All right. How do I share my screen here? Ah. Okay. Can you see it?
You bet. Looking good.
All right. Let's get started. So, hi, Brian James Rubinton, founder of Kanopi. Better place to think. Definitely still working on that tagline. And, thanks Boris and all the other contributors here. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk. So just to kind of introduce myself, my inspiration for this project, when I was, 3-4 years old, I had kind of this weird interest in personal organizers. I used to collect them and use them for everything as my external brain, and a more common interest in, rail networks and trains as a kid growing up in New York. So, looking back, I kind of see this as there were these platforms, right? These simple platforms I could wrap my head around that enabled this huge, universe of complex behavior. And I thought that was fascinating. I think that's what it was. So kind of going forward in my life, I saw this as, using data and models to enable complexity. I thought that was just an awesome thing in the world. So I did some of that at various places, kind of using data and data models to do stuff to derive value for companies. And, it was really more about managing complexity though. There's some complexity in a market, in a world, in a domain. Let's find a way to get some value out of it, which is okay. But I think it's a lot more interesting to kind of play with that complexity, right? To be able to both define that space where all the complexity can arise and, provide those tools, but also then provide tools to get value out of it. So it's not, just a big mess. So then, back to the subject at hand, tools for thought. I'm 31 now, so I grew up, with a computer in my house, and I, learned how to type my name before I could write it. Have used, computers all my life, but they weren't everywhere. And so I, learned to think through writing. I love books and notebooks and had that weird obsession with planners at an early age. So I've kind of sat between the two my whole life, and I've always been very frustrated that computers didn't just make me put those, pieces of paper away, those dead trees away. It always felt like, I had these magic boxes. They should be able to do so much more. But for a lot of people in the world, for most people in the world, they're largely substitutes when it comes to tools for thought. So when I think about that and I try to kind of separate, where I think we currently are from where we could be, I often ask, like, how often do you actually reuse and improve your existing notes with your different tools for thought? And the reason I ask this is because, this is how our minds work. We have thoughts and ideas and concepts in this big web of information and knowledge that we build on over time. That's very rarely how we use note-taking tools for thought. So we all know, though this is, an immensely crowded market, growing more crowded every day. When you talk to people with serious context of use, the more powerful tools are still used by a very small minority. And almost everyone, they're basically just using digital paper without even, as Frode described, self-describing digital paper. So I think there's still a very long way to go to, bringing this to the mainstream. So just to kind of jump into it, let's see, what is Kanopi? So getting to the features, kind of 4 main things going on. There are linked notes, and these are basically RDF, but there's a full screen text note with a unique title, and then they have links, coming in and links going out to other notes. And those links have labels, and those labels themselves are notes like RDF, right? The link label, attribute, link type, predicate, property, whatever your terminology is, they're first class in Kanopi. You then have maps and trees. These are like document types for working with your linked notes from different perspectives in different ways. So if you want to work spatially, if you want to work hierarchically, it's all there, but it's built on that same single knowledge base. Then web integrations. So Kanopi, because of this kind of RDF graphy basis, acts as a very kind of easy gateway to public knowledge graphs. Currently Wikidata and Semantic Scholar, but soon many more. I'll discuss in a bit why. And then finally, modulated note-taking. So Kanopi is a tool that's both very flexible, but also has structure to it. And it can gradually be as structured and rigid as you want it to be, or as loose and freewheeling as you want. And in order to make that kind of understandable and useful, I believe Kanopi and these tools in general need to kind of help users do that without confining them in any way. So we'll talk about that a bit. Knowing the audience and vision and everything, talk a bit about data ownership. So Kanopi is an alpha product, it's just me. So just purely for agility and convenience, it's centralized right now, but the design is to federate it and being able to round trip RDF, round trip your entire account data as RDF or subsets of it is an important part of that. And finally, end-to-end encryption, it's designed for it. I just haven't gone to it. It's, I think, very important in some communities and not even understood in others. Not even people are completely ignorant about it in most of the world. So haven't been the primary priority, but they're coming. All right, we'll now look at a brief demo. Okay, give you a feel for it. Can you hear it?
No, you have to share your audio separately. Often.
All right. Let's go through it. Starting out with a link for a note, mapping out my thoughts about reintroducing my daughter Ruth to vegetables. Create a map to do this. So just kind of think spatially. Ask a question, come up with some answers, ask a better question. All these things are notes and these things are links, the lines. And I come up with basically some answers and I add them to a list here, menu items. So all notes and links, it's going fast, but I jump to that note. I want to zoom out, look at the project, my menu for last month, feeding the family. The things I linked before show up in here in this hierarchy. I click on one of them, I look at it. I made the recipe before, I have notes. It's linked to a website, Serious Eats, where I got that recipe from. What that does is it brings in the metadata, structured data from the website and lets me click that stuff to add links to my system. And I'm jumping around basically. I hope that made some sense. If we have time, we can get into it live. It's a live product. And back to full screen. So zooming in a bit more, link notes, full screen text notes with a unique title. They have directed, bidirectional labeled links. Links are given equal prominence with the note content. So that was a super quick demo, but basically you have that text content in the middle, you have your links on the side. They're not just embedded in a big outline. But I think they can be at least of equal importance to like the big span of text. Every part of those links, including the label attribute, is a note. So they can be described and linked further. And kind of the belief here is that independently meaningful linked notes are kind of fundamental for reuse and for getting more value out of a knowledge graph over time. So that's why they look this way. And yeah, linked notes, they are RDF. You can export them today, you can share them. It's RDF. A note has a type. It uses other notes to describe links. All these things have labels. They use common schemas, RDF, RDFS, OWL. Yeah, it's all round trip and RDF. Maps and trees. So these are document types made of linked notes. You can work with your notes from different perspectives, right? Maps like diagrams, concept maps, we're thinking spatially. And they don't show everything in your knowledge graph. The idea is you pull some things out to kind of make sense of a certain space, answer a certain question, without being cluttered and distracted by everything else in your system. Trees are like outlines. We're zooming in and out a particular hierarchy in your graph, right? So if you take a graph, take a particular node, look at all the links going in one direction, that's a tree. So that's what outlines trees are in Kanopi. And the idea here is my original prototypes just had those linked notes, and they were a lot of fun, but I couldn't actually make sense of things with it. You'd get lost very quickly. You just capture this huge train of thought, and that weird confused state at the end of it was the same as what was in my head as in the tool, and that's weird and not actually helpful. These help you kind of make sense of things. And it's all about being able to kind of work with a tool from different contexts and perspectives while building on that same knowledge base to kind of improve the quality of that knowledge base. Web integrations. So Notes and Kanopi are RDF resources. You can search and explore knowledge graphs from within Kanopi and import that stuff as notes. You can associate external URIs with your notes to generate link suggestions from the external data source. So in that demo, I associated a note. I used Kanopi's browser extension actually to grab a recipe from Serious Eats. It created a note with the name. I then, came upon that note later when I was going to make it. I saw the ingredient and category link suggestions. I pulled in the stuff that was relevant. So that's all a very fluid thing with Kanopi. And this is all about accelerating the sync with between your personal knowledge graph and what's in your head, right? The idea is tools for thought start as this blank slate. It's not your brain, but you're trying to think with it. So that can be very painful, and you have to kind of catch it up. But we have these big structured knowledge bases, knowledge graphs on the internet, like Wikidata, Semantic Scholar, and many, many others. So if you build that bridge, I think it can be very helpful. And last, model-aided note-taking. The idea here is to guide users to build consistent knowledge graphs with suggestions, not with constraints. So a note type is suggested for every note, and that kind of powers these learned templates. So suggestions, suggested links based on notes of the same type. So if you have a note from meeting, and usually say meetings have participants and dates and stuff, it'll suggest to you, okay, you have a meeting, you probably want to add this information, but it won't require any of it, and it'll learn as that changes. This is all about just minimizing typing, number of decisions, while trying to help you improve quality. Project timeline. So I started playing with these ideas in 2015. It's the same code base, same Git repo. But it wasn't until 2019, after doing a whole bunch of research and experimenting, that I kind of came up with the idea of putting maps and trees on top of that linked note base. And that's when I solved my own personal problems. From there, I kind of built it into a product and started working on it full-time last September. So this year has been all about polishing it, making it much, much, much more usable, much more fully featured and robust. And I'm really trying to focus on non-technical users. So it's been a very interesting journey, but going well. And that is it. Thank you. Do we have questions?
Amazing. Thank you. Yes, we do. We've got one question up there. Jeff, can you do the honors?
You bet. So Peter asks, do you support prototype-based inheritance of attribute values like Mark Bernstein's Tinderbox?
I'm not familiar with Mark Bernstein's Tinderbox. Not yet. Yes, soon. Also, I definitely want, if you have a type and you have a subtype, a subclass of that type, and you get suggestions and things based on that hierarchy, yes, I want to do that. The struggle is in adding that sort of functionality without confusing people, without surprising people excessively. But I've spent some time working in the semantic web space and doing reasoning and all of that. And I would like to bring features and ideas from that space into this without confusing people. But yeah, soon.
Got a second question that just popped in. Gary asks, Wikidata is for notable things. Most of the things we care about and work with are not yet notable. How do you bridge these?
That is you using the tool. So it's right. The personal part will obviously not be notable, but it's like, was it an old Aristotle thought experiment, right? A person sitting in a dark room just staring at the wall. There's a lot less to think about, and that's not our lives. So a lot of that external world is what inspires our thoughts. So while it's not maybe the most important ones we have, it's a lot of the inspiration and motivation for our thinking. So I think it's useful, but yeah, it's not everything.
So other than just use RDF, how are you thinking about interchange?
Just use RDF is not enough. I mean, in a few ways. So RDF is this extremely flexible model, right? And the concepts of URIs, of these global unique identifiers, right? Something that like IPFS is strongly leveraged on, lets you do a lot of different things. And I think it's kind of the most flexible denominator. And so as standards develop, I think it will be much more straightforward for me to support them than other tools, than for other tools. As much in the system as possible, everything the user sees is in that RDF. So there's not some secret data model behind the scenes that's particularly important to users, display state and stuff.
So I guess the follow-up question would be, can you actually support standoff editing with multiple annotations?
That's a good question. So the editor right now I use is based on prose mirror, which is a hierarchy that is not standoff. I will switch to standoff if the latest version is open sourced, maybe.
So Blaine, as an example, Blaine's using an @JSON powered editor that supports this sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's CK Editor 5 as an example. But I think basically something that supports standoff editing and then can round trip to different formats is another probably one of those shared use cases that we can look at over time.
Yeah, I went with the latest version of TipTap built on prose mirror just as a fairly robust, easy to use, good plugin ecosystem. Standoff, I think, is clearly superior in a lot of ways and would fit with the model better. But yeah, not doing it yet.
Awesome.
Okay. Another question from Michael Gartner this time. Any ideas of overlaps or collaboration with Codex?
Possibly. Any specific ideas? I mean, I don't know. The clients could probably interact fairly deeply. I'm just building out kind of the sharing collaboration functionality in Kanopi now, but yeah, I mean, would love to do more with those. Part of RDF is if you say a node is the same thing as a Wikidata entity or a website or something like that, then you can something overlay a Kanopi window within Codex. Yeah, maybe. But just the idea that, right, you can identify things as being the same once you have that kind of external point of reference. So you can weave things together in much more interesting ways.
I think a point here to make is when we're developing tools, we don't think of Interchange because we're working on our own tools. And that's not a knock on anyone, right? So that's something interesting even just to think of going forward. And I have no idea either. So I think that's part of the discovery that we're doing.
Yeah.
Great. Next question from Jess Martin. How do you see spatial organization working? Most tools focus on text or structured representation like graphs or trees. Would love to be able to spatially organize my notes and maintain that organization.
Yes. So right now, the way it works is you can build that map, you can get that spatial arrangement, you can have many maps for many purposes. So sometimes users will create a map for a project to organize all their materials for that project. Sometimes we'll use it to diagram a system. You can kind of do both. I mean, in terms of actually organizing, I think there's another tool, Notodo, and that's where there's one big spatial map and then it nests, or it doesn't quite nest, but it overlaps. I think Kanopi is going to be more of a there's an iOS app out now that's fairly popular, but you're gonna be able to nest maps together and stuff if you want that, like Muse, yes, that endless nested spatial arrangement. Right now, Kanopi is about the constraints fairly useful. You want to put enough things on the screen so you can see it and make sense of it at a time, and then you'll be able to nest them and link them together from there.
Cool. And then one last question from Gary. Are you integrating with Solid, meaning Tim Berners-Lee's project?
No, Solid. Not yet, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something that's interesting to you?
I need to know more about it. I mean, as like a tool for distributing, bits of RDF, bits of this content, absolutely. But I don't know enough about it to, can you really build an application on top? Or is it more useful
yeah.
for Interchange?
We actually had someone come on a Vision Thursday Tech Talk. Understory is building a digital garden that has solid pods. So it has Interchange by default. So definitely something to look at there if you're deep in RDF world.
Sure, cool.
More overhead as a single developer with everything else that you've got on your list as well. So, but
Yeah.
are you open source?
No.
That would be the other part where, you know, you're not going to get any help from other people. So live today, you can go to kanopi.io and sign up now to try it.
Yes, you can go to kanopi.io and sign up.
Amazing. One more round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much,
great.
Brian. How am I doing this? Remove spotlight. There we are. We're back in gallery mode. So I've kept you all for almost 2 hours. Again, thank you so much to all of our panelists. That was amazing. And I'm really looking forward to see how this group continues. We've got, you know, a number of things that were surfaced this time around. I'm actually going to just quickly throw up a couple of things up here. So, you know, we talked about EPUB to AtJSON, an AtJSON editor, which came up again during this thing, continuing community speaker series. I've gone ahead and put together a GitHub repo. It's where I checked in the notes on the chat log from last time. We'll do that again. If you want to drop into Fission Discord, really, I see that as a temporary place to bootstrap. I'm putting question marks next to all of these things because it is not my intent for this to be a forever Fission hosted thing. You know, I've started using this brain in a couple of different spots. And so this is really just a call for people to get involved. You know, we'll share the links, we'll do a follow-up. We don't have a next event planned. So what I'd really like to do is, you know, the next step is booting up the community. Who wants to volunteer to go through some of the 3 or 4 submissions that we already have, pick which of them, when are we going to present? Fission is happy to use our paid for webinar account and other tools, but I'd like the next step for this to be, you know, go beyond the bounds of one company. I think the GitHub is going to be a good place to do things like upvoting and have one shared space. I've made it a separate organization. I'm happy to bring on other people to be organization guides there and figure out where we go from here. I think I'm really excited about some solid next steps. We're going to experiment at Fission with AtJSON in a couple of things. You know, our toolkit works much like Solid, where all the users own their data. So there's automatic interchange between all applications. And our champions of tools like IPFS that are super global. You know, I'm seeing lots of the same energy here, and we say that we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I also see a lot of people really interested in moving things forward. Any other panelists have something to add before we wrap up? Amazing. I know it's late for all of you. I'm going to hit the stop recording button for starters. Thank you so much.